It was the quietest Mother's Day my grandmother had ever seen. No phone calls, no flowers, no cards tucked in the mailbox, just silence. The kind of silence that weighs on you, thick and suffocating, like the air before a storm. I pulled into her driveway around 10 in the morning, carrying a small bouquet of her favorite peonies and a card I'd written the night before. The house looked the same as it always did. A charming two-story colonial with white shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the breeze, and a garden so well-maintained it could have been featured in a magazine. My grandmother had always taken pride in her home. It was her sanctuary, the place where she'd raised 3 children, buried a husband, and somehow still managed to keep blooming. I knocked once before letting myself in. The door was unlocked, which didn't surprise me. She'd always said locking doors was for people who had something to hide. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The living room was bathed in soft morning light filtering through lace curtains. And there she was, sitting in her favorite armchair, hands folded in her lap, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Photos of her children, her grandchildren, family vacations she'd paid for, weddings she'd financed, graduations she'd attended alone because everyone else was too busy. She looked up when she heard me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Relief, maybe. Or just the smallest glimmer of hope that someone, anyone, had remembered. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and a little shaky. "You didn't have to come." But I did, because no one else had. I set the flowers on the coffee table and sat beside her, taking her hands in mine. They were small and delicate, marked with age spots and years of hard work. "Happy Mother's Day, Grandma," I said, squeezing gently. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, honey. That's very sweet of you." I glanced at her phone sitting on the side table. The screen was dark. No missed calls, no notifications, nothing. "Has anyone else called?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, then shook her head. "They're probably busy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know how it is. Everyone has their own lives." Busy. That word hung in the air like an accusation. Busy with brunch, busy with their own kids, busy posting perfect family photos on Instagram while the woman who'd funded their entire lives sat alone in a quiet house, pretending she wasn't hurt. I felt something crack inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Just a deep, aching sadness mixed with disbelief. This was the woman who'd paid for my mother's college tuition when my grandfather's insurance didn't cover it. The woman who'd bailed out my uncle when his business went under, no questions asked. The woman who'd covered my cousin's legal fees during a brutal custody battle because she refused to let her great-grandchildren suffer. She'd given everything, and they couldn't even send a text. I stood up, smoothing down my jeans. "Grandma, go get dressed. Put on something nice." She blinked up at me, confused. "What? Why?" "Because," I said, smiling for the first time that morning, "we're going out, and I'm not taking no for an answer." She tilted her head, studying me with those sharp blue eyes that still missed nothing. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." I helped her to her feet, steadying her as she shuffled toward the stairs. She moved slower than she used to, her knees stiff, her balance a little uncertain. But there was a lightness in her step now, a spark of curiosity that hadn't been there before. While she got ready, I stood in the living room, staring at those photos on the mantel. My mother, smiling in her graduation gown, holding a diploma my grandmother had paid for. My uncle, standing proudly in front of the house my grandmother had helped him buy. My cousin, surrounded by her kids, all of them wearing clothes my grandmother had gifted them last Christmas. They were everywhere in this house. Their achievements, their milestones, their happiness. All of it touched by her generosity. And where were they today? Nowhere. 20 minutes later, my grandmother came back downstairs wearing a soft cream blouse, navy slacks, and a pearl necklace my grandfather had given her decades ago. Her hair was brushed neatly, and she'd even put on a little lipstick. "How do I look?" she asked, smoothing her blouse self-consciously. "Beautiful," I said, and I meant it. We walked to my car together, her hand tucked into the crook of my arm. The May sun was warm, but not oppressive, and the neighborhood smelled like freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Birds chirped from the oak trees lining the street. It was the kind of perfect spring day that should have been filled with joy. I opened the passenger door for her and helped her in, buckling her seatbelt like she used to do for me when I was little. She laughed softly. "I'm not that old yet." "I know," I said, "but humor me." As I pulled out of the driveway, she kept glancing at me, curiosity written all over her face. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" "Nope." "Not even a hint?" "Nope." She settled back into her seat, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You're stubborn, just like your grandfather." "I'll take that as a compliment." We drove through the city, past the familiar landmarks of her life. The church where she'd married my grandfather 59 years ago. The elementary school where she'd volunteered for decades. The diner where she used to take me for pancakes every Saturday morning when I was a kid. She didn't say much, but I could feel her relaxing, the tension slowly draining from her shoulders. I turned on the radio, and an old Frank Sinatra song came on. She hummed along, tapping her fingers lightly against her thigh. "I love this song," she murmured. "I know." When we finally pulled up to the spa, her eyes went wide. It was one of those upscale places with floor-to-ceiling windows, tasteful stone accents, and the kind of serene atmosphere that made you feel like you were stepping into a sanctuary. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "This is your day," I said. "Massages, facials, the works. You deserve it." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Sweetheart, you didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," I interrupted gently. "Because no one else did." She didn't argue, she just reached over and squeezed my hand, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. Inside, the spa staff greeted us like royalty. Soft music played in the background. The air smelled like eucalyptus and chamomile. They led my grandmother to a private room where a massage therapist was waiting. I watched her go, her steps a little steadier now, her face glowing with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple, profound relief of being cared for. While she was getting her massage, I sat in the lounge area, sipping herbal tea and scrolling through my phone. That's when I saw it. The family group chat. Dozens of messages, all from today. My mother had posted a photo of herself at brunch with friends, champagne in hand, captioned, "Best Mother's Day ever." My uncle had shared a picture of his new boat, tagging it, "Blessed Life." My cousin had uploaded a selfie with her kids at the zoo, complete with heart emojis and hashtags. Not one of them had mentioned my grandmother. Not one. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight, my chest burning with something I couldn't quite name. Not just anger, something deeper. Betrayal, maybe. Or disgust. These people had built their lives on her generosity, and they couldn't even spare 5 minutes to acknowledge her existence. I thought about texting them, calling them out right there in the chat. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I put my phone away and waited for my grandmother to finish her massage. When she emerged, her face was flushed and peaceful, her smile genuine for the first time all day. "That was heaven," she said, sighing contentedly. "Good, because we're just getting started." Next came the facial, then the manicure, then the pedicure. By the time we were done, it was early afternoon, and the spa staff led us to a private dining area for lunch. White linens, fresh flowers, a menu that looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant. My grandmother's eyes sparkled as she looked around. "I can't remember the last time someone treated me like this," she said quietly. "You deserve it every day," I said. We ordered salmon, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of champagne. As we ate, she told me stories I'd heard 100 times before, but somehow they felt different now. More precious. More fragile. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and looked at me, her eyes suddenly serious. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." She took a shaky breath. "I feel invisible to them. To your mother, your uncle, your cousin. All of them. They only call when they need something. Money, advice, a favor. But when they don't need anything?" She trailed off, her voice cracking. "They forget I exist." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not invisible to me, Grandma. And I promise you, that's going to change." She nodded, blinking back tears. We finished our champagne in silence, the kind of silence that didn't need words. By the time we left the spa, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting everything in golden light. My grandmother looked different, softer, lighter. Like she'd been carrying a weight for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. On the drive home, she rested her head against the window, watching the world pass by, a small smile on her lips. And that's when I made my decision. If they weren't going to appreciate her, I'd make sure they remembered what they'd lost. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. Then I took a photo. My grandmother, glowing in the passenger seat, eyes closed, a peaceful expression on her face. I typed a caption, "Guess who remembered what day it is?" because someone had to. And I hit send. The reaction was instant. If you've ever felt forgotten by the people who should care the most, drop the word invisible in the comments. I see you. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Growing up, my grandmother wasn't just family. She was the foundation, the one person everyone knew they could count on, no matter what. I didn't fully understand that as a kid. To me, she was just Grandma, the one who made chocolate chip cookies that were always warm when I visited, the one who let me stay up late watching old movies, the one who never raised her voice, even when I probably deserved it. But as I got older, I started to see the bigger picture. And it wasn't pretty. My mother was the oldest of three. Ambitious, driven, desperate to prove herself. She'd grown up in a modest household where money was tight and dreams were expensive. My grandmother had worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on after my grandfather died young, leaving her with 3 kids and a mortgage she could barely afford. Despite that, my mother had big plans. She wanted to go to college, become a lawyer, make something of herself. And my grandmother supported her, even when it meant taking out loans she'd spend the next 2 decades paying off. I remember finding the paperwork once, years later, tucked away in a drawer. Loan statements, payment schedules, interest rates that made my stomach turn. My grandmother had never mentioned it, never used it as leverage, never made my mother feel guilty. She just did it. "Because that's what mothers do," she'd said when I asked her about it. "They give everything, even when there's nothing left." My mother graduated top of her class, got a job at a prestigious firm, bought a house in a neighborhood where people had landscapers and cleaning services. She made it. And my grandmother? She kept working, kept struggling, kept smiling. Then there was my uncle, the middle child, the one who never quite figured out how to stand on his own 2 feet. He'd tried a dozen different business ventures over the years, a food truck that went bankrupt in 6 months, a real estate scheme that turned out to be barely legal, a tech startup that never made it past the pitch phase. Every time he failed, he came back to my grandmother. And every time she helped him, down payments, security deposits, bail money once, though we don't talk about that. She never said no, even when she should have. The last time he asked for help, it was for a house. His credit was so bad no bank would touch him, so my grandmother co-signed the loan. I remember sitting at her kitchen table when she told me. "He's my son," she'd said simply, as if that explained everything. "What am I supposed to do? Let him live on the streets?" "He's 43, Grandma. At some point, he has to take responsibility." She'd just smiled, sad and tired. "Maybe, but not today." That house? The one she co-signed for. He refinanced it twice without telling her. Nearly defaulted once. She ended up covering 3 months of his mortgage when he forgot to pay. She never brought it up to him, never asked for the money back, just quietly absorbed the cost, the way she absorbed everything. And then there was my cousin, Stephanie, my uncle's daughter. She'd gotten herself into a mess a few years back, a custody battle with her ex-husband that turned ugly fast. Lawyers, court fees, child psychologists. It wasn't cheap. My uncle couldn't help. He was too busy trying to keep his own head above water. My mother could have, but she didn't. She said it wasn't her responsibility. That Stephanie had made her own choices and needed to deal with the consequences. So my grandmother stepped in. Again, she paid for everything. The retainer, the court costs, the evaluations, tens of thousands of dollars she didn't really have. And Stephanie won, got full custody, kept her kids. She cried on my grandmother's shoulder the day the verdict came in, sobbing about how grateful she was, how she'd never forget this, how she'd pay her back. My grandmother had just stroked her hair and said, "You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. Just take care of those babies." Stephanie never paid her back, not a dime, and my grandmother never asked. That was her pattern. Give without expecting, love without conditions, sacrifice without recognition. And for years, it seemed to work. The family functioned. People got what they needed. Crises were averted. But somewhere along the way, the gratitude disappeared. Replaced by entitlement, by expectation, by the unspoken assumption that my grandmother would always be there, checkbook open, arms wide, no matter what. They stopped saying thank you, stopped visiting unless they needed something, stopped seeing her as a person and started seeing her as a resource. I watched it happen slowly, over years. Family dinners where my grandmother cooked for hours and no one helped clean up. Holidays where she bought gifts for everyone and received generic candles in return. Birthdays where people forgot to call until days later, offering half-hearted apologies. She never complained, never called them out, just kept giving, kept loving, kept hoping that someday someone would notice. But they didn't. Last Christmas, she'd hosted dinner at her house like she always did. 30 people crammed into her dining room, eating food she'd spent 2 days preparing. My mother had shown up late, complaining about traffic. My uncle had brought his new girlfriend, who spent the entire meal on her phone. Stephanie's kids had run wild, knocking over a lamp and spilling juice on the carpet. And my grandmother. She'd smiled through it all, serving food, pouring drinks, pretending everything was fine. I'd stayed late to help her clean up. By the time everyone left, she looked exhausted. We washed dishes in silence for a while before she finally spoke. "Do you think they're happy?" she'd asked, her voice quiet. "Who?" "All of them. Your mother, your uncle, Stephanie. Do you think all the help I gave them made them happy?" I didn't know how to answer that, so I just hugged her, held her while she cried softly into my shoulder, her small frame shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for years. "I just wanted to make things easier for them," she'd whispered. "I just wanted them to be okay." That night, standing in her kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and leftover food no one had bothered to take home, I realized something. My grandmother had spent her entire life making sure everyone else was okay. And no one, not one single person, had ever stopped to ask if she was. That's what I was thinking about as I drove her home from the spa on Mother's Day. The decades of one-sided love, the endless giving, the quiet sacrifices no one acknowledged, and the crushing loneliness of being needed but not wanted. Not really. When I pulled into her driveway, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She looked over at me, her eyes still bright from the day we'd had. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for remembering me." "Always, Grandma. Always." She squeezed my hand one more time before getting out of the car. I watched her walk up to her door, moving slower than she used to, but standing a little taller than she had that morning. And as I drove away, I pulled out my phone, opened the family group chat, and posted the photo I'd taken earlier. My grandmother in the car, glowing, content, loved. The caption was simple. Guess who remembered what day it is? Because someone had to. Within seconds, my phone started buzzing. Messages flooded in, fast and frantic, like someone had just sounded an alarm. My mother was first, of course. What's that supposed to mean? Then my uncle. "Is she okay? Where are you?" Stephanie chimed in with a string of crying emojis. "OMG, I totally forgot. I'm the worst." I didn't respond. Instead, I posted another photo. This one was a close-up of my grandmother's face at the spa, eyes closed, a serene smile on her lips, years of stress momentarily erased. The caption this time was more pointed. 82 years of unconditional love, a lifetime of sacrifices, and not one of you could even send a text. Let that sink in. The group chat exploded. My mother. "This is completely unfair. I was going to call her tonight." My uncle. "I've been swamped with work. You know how it is." Stephanie. "Why are you being so dramatic? It's just one day." Just one day. I stared at those words, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Just one day. As if 82 years of selfless devotion could be summed up and dismissed with those 3 words. As if forgetting the woman who'd funded their entire lives was somehow excusable because they were busy. Busy doing what? Posting brunch selfies? Showing off new boats? Taking their own kids to the zoo while the woman who'd made it all possible sat alone in an empty house? I started typing a response, then stopped. Deleted it. Because words wouldn't fix this. Explanations wouldn't make them understand. They'd spent years taking her for granted, and one guilt-induced phone call wasn't going to change that. So instead, I posted one more thing. A screenshot of my grandmother's call log from that morning. 0 incoming calls. 0 text messages. 0 acknowledgement of her existence. No caption needed. The silence after that was deafening. For about 3 minutes, no one said anything. Then the excuses started again, weaker this time, desperate. My mother tried damage control. "Okay, this is getting out of hand. Can we please talk about this privately?" My uncle attempted humor. All right, we messed up. No need to crucify us in the group chat." Stephanie went for manipulation. "You're making everyone feel terrible. Is that what you want?" I almost laughed. Was that what I wanted? For them to feel a fraction of the hurt my grandmother had been carrying for years? For them to sit in the discomfort of their own selfishness for once? Yeah, maybe it was. But I still didn't respond. I just turned off my notifications and went home. The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls. 17 from my mother, 9 from my uncle, 12 from Stephanie. Even a few from extended family members who'd apparently been pulled into the drama. I ignored all of them. I had nothing to say. Not yet. Instead, I went back to my grandmother's house. I wanted to see how she was doing, to make sure the peace from yesterday hadn't evaporated overnight. When I arrived, I found her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, planting tulip bulbs for next spring. She looked up when she heard me, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "Back already?" Couldn't stay away. She laughed, brushing soil from her hands. "You're a good girl, you know that?" We sat together on the porch swing, the May breeze carrying the scent of her roses. For a while, we didn't talk, just rocked gently, listening to the birds, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "They called, you know, last night, all of them." I turned to look at her. And they apologized, said they'd been terrible, that they'd make it up to me. She paused, staring out at the garden. They sounded genuine, or maybe just guilty. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. What did you tell them? She smiled, but it was sad. I told them I forgave them, because that's what I do. I felt a surge of frustration. "Grandma, you don't have to—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I know I don't have to. But forgiveness isn't for them, sweetheart. It's for me. So I can sleep at night. So I don't spend my last years drowning in bitterness." She looked at me then, her blue eyes sharp and knowing. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking, for a long time actually, about what I want, about what I deserve, and I've decided some things need to change." "Like what?" She stood up slowly, motioning for me to follow her inside. We went to her study, a small room lined with bookshelves and family photos. She pulled out a leather folder from her desk drawer and handed it to me. Inside were legal documents, official-looking papers with her signature at the bottom. I scanned the first page, my heart starting to pound. "Grandma, is this—" "My will," she finished. "I had my lawyer update it last month." I stared at her, not sure what to say. She sat down in her chair, folding her hands in her lap, looking more composed than I'd ever seen her. "I've left the house to you, along with most of my savings. There are small amounts for your mother, your uncle, and Stephanie. Enough to show I still care, but not enough to let them think nothing changed." My throat felt tight. "Grandma, I don't—" "You're the only one who's ever treated me like more than a bank," she said simply. "You visit because you want to, not because you need something. You remember my birthday without Facebook reminding you. You called just to talk. You see me." Tears burned behind my eyes. They're going to lose their minds when they find out. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I know. And maybe that's not kind, but I've spent my whole life being kind. Maybe it's time I was honest instead." We sat there for a long moment, the weight of her decisions settling between us. I thought about the fallout, the accusations, the family drama that would inevitably explode, and I realized I didn't care. Because for once, my grandmother was choosing herself, and I would stand by her, no matter what. Later that week, the family invited themselves over to my grandmother's house for a reconciliation dinner. My mother organized it, framing it as a chance to make things right, to show my grandmother how much they cared. I was suspicious from the start, but my grandmother agreed to it. Maybe she wanted to give them one more chance, or maybe she just wanted to see how they'd react now that they knew someone was watching. I showed up early to help her prepare. We made lasagna, garlic bread, salad. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, humming softly to herself. When the family arrived, they came bearing gifts. My mother brought flowers, expensive ones from the fancy florist downtown. My uncle brought wine, the kind with a label that costs more than most people's groceries. Stephanie brought a framed photo of her kids with a handwritten note that said, "To the best great-grandma ever." It all felt performative, rehearsed, like they'd coordinated their guilt offerings in a separate group chat I wasn't part of. Dinner started pleasant enough. Everyone complimented the food, told stories, laughed at old jokes. On the surface, it looked like a normal family gathering. But there was tension underneath. I could feel it in the pauses between sentences. In the way my mother kept glancing at me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, in the way my uncle drank his wine a little too fast. Halfway through the meal, my mother cleared her throat. "So, Mom," she began, her tone careful. "We've been thinking. We want to help you more, be more present." My grandmother set down her fork. "That's nice to hear. We were thinking," my uncle added, jumping in, "maybe we could set up a rotation. Each of us visits once a week, helps with groceries, chores, whatever you need." Stephanie nodded enthusiastically. "And we'll make sure to call more, text more, stay in touch." They all looked at my grandmother expectantly, waiting for her to gush with gratitude, to tell them how wonderful they were for finally stepping up. Instead, she just smiled. "That sounds lovely," she said quietly, "but I'm not sure I'll be here much longer." The table went still. My mother's face paled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," my grandmother said calmly, "I've been thinking about moving. Maybe into one of those senior communities, somewhere with activities, people my own age, less maintenance." "But this is your house," my uncle protested. "You've lived here for 40 years. "Exactly," she said. "Maybe it's time for a change." I bit back a smile. I knew what she was really saying. She was testing them, seeing if their sudden concern was genuine or just another performance. Stephanie leaned forward, her voice urgent. "You can't sell this house. It's part of the family." My grandmother raised an eyebrow. "Is it? Funny. I thought I was part of the family too, but that didn't seem to matter much on Mother's Day." The silence that followed was brutal. My mother tried to recover. "We said we were sorry. We're trying to make amends." "And I appreciate that," my grandmother said. "But words are easy. It's the actions that matter, and actions take time." She stood up, gathering plates even though we weren't done eating. "Now, who wants dessert?" The rest of the evening was strained. People left earlier than usual, their goodbyes rushed and awkward. When it was just me and my grandmother again, she sank into her chair and let out a long breath. "How did I do?" she asked. "Perfect," I said. She smiled. "I think I'm getting the hang of this honesty thing. It looks good on you." And it did. For the first time in years, my grandmother wasn't bending herself into shapes to make other people comfortable. She was standing tall, speaking her truth. And I couldn't have been prouder. So here's where I need to know what you think. Was my grandmother right to update her will? Was she justified in pulling back from people who'd taken her for granted for decades? Or should she have just kept forgiving, kept giving, kept being the endless well everyone drank from without ever refilling? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your perspective on this. And if you're invested in this story, if you want to know what happened when they found out about the will, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next is going to change everything. The phone calls started 3 days after the dinner, not to my grandmother, to me. My mother called first, her voice tight with forced calm. "We need to talk about your grandmother." "What about her?" "She's acting strange, talking about selling the house, moving away. I think she might be declining." I almost laughed. "Declining? She's sharper than she's been in years." "That's not what I mean." My mother paused, choosing her words carefully. "I mean mentally, emotionally, making rash decisions. You saw her at dinner. She was combative, defensive. That's not like her." "Maybe," I said slowly. "She's finally stopped letting people walk all over her." Silence. Then my mother's voice turned cold. "Did you put these ideas in her head?" "What ideas?" "That we don't care. That we're using her. You've been poisoning her against us." I gripped my phone tighter. "I didn't have to poison anything. You did that yourselves." "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I interrupted. "You forgot her on Mother's Day. You've treated her like an ATM for decades. And now that she's setting boundaries, you're calling her mentally unstable. Do you hear yourself? My mother's voice rose. She's our mother. We have a right to be concerned. Then maybe you should have been concerned before she had to spend Mother's Day alone. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I didn't regret it. Within the hour, my uncle called. He tried a different approach, playing the victim. Look, I know I messed up. I'm not perfect. But this whole thing is tearing the family apart. Maybe it needed to be torn apart, I said, so it could be built back better. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one being cut out. Cut out of what? I asked. She's still here. She's still alive. You can still have a relationship with her. Unless the only relationship you care about is the one that benefits you financially. He sputtered, unable to find a response. Then he hung up on me. Stephanie was last. Her message came via text, long and rambling, full of crying emojis and guilt-laden apologies. She swore she'd changed, promised she'd do better, begged me not to turn my grandmother against her. I didn't respond, because I hadn't turned my grandmother against anyone. They'd done that all by themselves. 2 weeks after Mother's Day, my grandmother called me. Her voice sounded lighter than it had in months. I did something today, she said. What? I met with my lawyer again, made it official. My heart skipped. Official? The will, it's done, signed, notarized, no takebacks. I sat down slowly. How do you feel? She laughed and it sounded almost giddy. Terrified, relieved, free. Is it possible to feel all of those at once? I think so, I said. Do they know yet? No, and I'm not planning to tell them. Let it be a surprise. One last lesson in taking things for granted. Over the next few weeks, my grandmother seemed to transform. She started going out more, joined a book club, took a watercolor painting class, made friends with women her own age who didn't see her as a resource to be tapped. She was building a life that didn't revolve around her family's needs. And she was happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy. I visited her often, sometimes just sitting with her in the garden, other times going on small adventures. We drove to the coast one weekend, walked along the beach, ate overpriced ice cream. She told me stories I'd never heard before, about her childhood, her marriage, the dreams she'd put aside to raise her kids. Do you regret it? I asked one afternoon as we sat on a bench overlooking the ocean. Giving so much? She thought about it for a long time. I regret that they never learned to give back. That's not the same as regretting the love. Love is never wasted, even when it's not returned the way you hoped. But it still hurts, I said. Oh, sweetheart. Of course it hurts. But that's the risk of loving anyone. They might not love you back the way you need, but you do it anyway, because the alternative is closing yourself off, and that's no way to live. Meanwhile, my mother, uncle, and Stephanie continued their rehabilitation tour. They visited my grandmother regularly now, bringing groceries, offering to help with chores, sitting through long conversations without checking their phones. It was progress, I guess, but it felt hollow, motivated by guilt rather than genuine care. My grandmother accepted their efforts graciously, but I could tell she wasn't fooled. They're trying, she told me once, and I appreciate that, but it's hard to forget that they only started trying after they were called out. Summer came. My grandmother's garden exploded with color. She spent hours tending to it, her hands deep in the soil, a peaceful expression on her face. One evening in late June, we were sitting on her porch when she turned to me suddenly. I want to tell you something about why I chose you. I set down my lemonade. You don't have to explain. I want to, she insisted. Because I don't want you to think it's just about Mother's Day, or the spa day, or any one thing. She took my hand. You've been showing up for me for years, quiet, consistent, without expecting anything in return. You visit because you want to, not because you need something. You listen when I talk. You remember the little things. You make me feel seen. Her eyes filled with tears. That's what love is. Not the grand gestures, not the expensive gifts. It's the small, everyday choices. The phone calls just to check in. The cups of tea we share. The way you laugh at my old stories even though you've heard them 100 times. That's the inheritance I want to pass on. Not just money or a house, but the knowledge that you're loved. Really, truly loved. And that love doesn't have to be earned or performed or negotiated. It just is. I was crying now too, holding her hand tightly. Grandma. Let them be angry, she said softly. Let them call me unfair. I've spent my whole life trying to make everyone else happy. And you know what? They're still not satisfied. So maybe it's time I stop trying to be everything to everyone and just be something to the people who actually see me. I see you, I whispered. I know, sweetheart. I know. The call came on a Tuesday in October. I was at work when my phone rang. My grandmother's lawyer. I'm calling to inform you that your grandmother has been admitted to the hospital, he said gently. Heart attack. She's stable, but she's asking for you. I dropped everything and drove straight there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Please, I thought. Not yet. Not now. When I got to her room, she was propped up in bed, looking smaller and frailer than I'd ever seen her. But her eyes were still sharp, still bright. There you are, she said, smiling weakly. I rushed to her side, taking her hand. I'm here. I'm right here. Good. She squeezed my fingers. I need to tell you something. Grandma, you should rest. No, listen. Her grip tightened. The will, it's all set. Everything's in place. I've told the lawyer. You're the executor. When the time comes, you'll handle everything. Please don't talk like that. Sweetheart, we both know I'm not getting any younger. And I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let them make you feel guilty, for any of it. You've earned every bit of what I'm leaving you. Not because you're perfect, but because you loved me when it wasn't convenient, when there was nothing to gain. That matters. Do you understand? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I understand. Good. She closed her eyes, exhausted. Now stop crying. I'm not dead yet. I laughed through my tears and she smiled. My grandmother recovered from the heart attack, but it was a wake-up call. Her doctor said she needed to slow down. Take it easy. No more gardening marathons or long walks. She hated it, but she complied. Sort of. She still snuck into the garden when no one was looking, still insisted on making her own meals, still refused to be treated like she was fragile. My mother, uncle, and Stephanie ramped up their visits after the hospital scare. Suddenly, everyone was concerned, attentive, helpful. My grandmother accepted their presence, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was testing them, waiting to see if their care would outlast the crisis. It didn't. By December, the visits had tapered off again, back to the usual sporadic check-ins and last-minute cancellations. My grandmother just shook her head. Predictable, she said. But at least now I know for sure. Christmas came. This year, my grandmother spent it with me at my apartment. Just the two of us. We made too much food, watched old movies, and exchanged small, thoughtful gifts. She gave me a necklace that had belonged to her mother. I gave her a photo album filled with pictures from our year together. All the moments they'd missed. She cried. Happy tears this time. This was the best Christmas I've had in years, she said. Same, I whispered. The rest of the family had their own gathering. They invited my grandmother, of course. She politely declined, said she wasn't feeling up to it. They didn't push, just sent a group text later with a photo of everyone together, captioned, "Missing you, Mom." My grandmother looked at it for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. I used to think I needed their approval, she said quietly. Their acceptance, their love, But I don't. Not anymore. I have yours, and that's enough. We sat together in comfortable silence, the Christmas lights twinkling softly, and I realized this was what peace looked like. Not perfect, not without pain, but real, honest, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. The kind of love that didn't ask for anything in return. And for my grandmother, after a lifetime of giving, that was the greatest gift of all. So here's my question for you. Do you think my grandmother was wrong to leave most of her estate to me? Do you think she should have divided it equally, regardless of how her children treated her? Or do you believe that inheritance should reflect the relationship, not just the bloodline? I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Comment below and let me know where you stand. And if you want to know what happened when the will was finally read, when my family found out what my grandmother had decided, make sure you're subscribed. Because that moment was unforgettable. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss it. My grandmother lived another 6 years after that Christmas. 6 beautiful, peaceful years where she finally lived for herself. She traveled to places she'd always wanted to see, made new friends, took up hobbies she'd abandoned decades ago, and she spent time with me. So much time. We had weekly dinners, weekend trips, long phone calls about nothing and everything. She told me once that these were the happiest years of her life. Not because she had more money or more freedom, but because she finally felt valued, seen, loved for who she was, not what she could provide. The rest of the family stayed in the picture, but at a distance. They visited occasionally, usually around holidays or birthdays. The visits were pleasant but superficial. Everyone playing their roles, saying the right things, never digging too deep. My grandmother was cordial, kind even, but the closeness was gone. She'd drawn a line, and they'd proven they didn't care enough to cross it when it required actual effort. I think they sensed the shift, suspected that something had changed in the will, but no one had the courage to ask outright, and my grandmother certainly wasn't volunteering the information. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Sunday morning in April. I found her when I came by for our usual brunch date. She looked serene, like she was just resting. The grief hit me like a tidal wave. Not because I wasn't prepared, we both knew it was coming, but because the world suddenly felt so much emptier without her in it. She'd been my anchor, my safe place, the one person who understood me completely. And now she was gone. The funeral was small but well attended. Friends from her book club, neighbors, people whose lives she'd touched in quiet, meaningful ways. My mother, uncle, and Stephanie were there, of course, dressed in black, faces solemn, playing the part of grieving family. They gave eulogies that painted her as a saint, a selfless matriarch who'd sacrificed everything for her children. It was all true, technically, but it felt incomplete, like they were describing a statue, not a person. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I talked about the woman I knew, the one who made terrible jokes, who loved romance novels and old westerns, who could name every bird in her garden, who taught me that love isn't about grand gestures, it's about showing up, again and again, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one's watching. I didn't mention the will, didn't allude to the family dynamics, just honored her memory the way she deserved, with honesty. After the funeral, everyone gathered at my grandmother's house for a reception. It felt strange being there without her. The house seemed too quiet, too empty. People ate the food I'd catered, told stories, laughed at old memories. It almost felt normal. Then the lawyer arrived. He pulled me aside first, his expression neutral, but knowing. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. I took a deep breath. No, but let's do it anyway. He gathered the family in the living room, my mother, uncle, Stephanie, and a few other relatives who'd been named in the will. Everyone sat down, curiosity and anxiety written all over their faces. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents. Thank you all for being here, he began. We're gathered to read the last will and testament of Margaret Eleanor Thompson. He started with the small bequests, a few $1,000s to her church, donations to her favorite charities, some jewelry and personal items distributed to various family members. Then he got to the big part. To my daughter, Catherine Thompson, I leave the sum of $50,000. My mother's face flickered with something, relief, maybe, or disappointment that it wasn't more. To my son, David Thompson, I leave the sum of $50,000. My uncle nodded slowly, his jaw tight. To my granddaughter, Stephanie Parker, I leave the sum of $25,000. Stephanie blinked, looking confused but not yet alarmed. Then the lawyer paused. The remainder of the estate, including the house, all financial assets, and personal belongings not otherwise specified, I leave to my granddaughter, Catherine's daughter. He said my name. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My mother's face went pale, then red. What? She breathed. There must be a mistake, my uncle said, leaning forward. That can't be right. The lawyer shook his head. There's no mistake. This will was updated 2 years ago, properly witnessed and notarized. It's legally binding. But that's... Stephanie trailed off, doing the math in her head. That's everything. The house alone is worth approximately $2 million, the lawyer finished, plus the financial assets, which bring the total estate value to roughly $3 million. My mother stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is insane. She can't do this. She wasn't in her right mind. Mrs. Thompson, the lawyer said calmly, your mother was fully competent when she made these changes. I have medical evaluations to prove it. She knew exactly what she was doing. But why? My uncle demanded, turning to me. What did you do? How did you manipulate her? I just stared at him. I didn't manipulate anyone. Bullshit, Stephanie spat. You poisoned her against us, turned her into some bitter old woman who... Stop. My voice came out harder than I intended. Don't you dare rewrite history. She gave you everything, your whole lives, and you couldn't even remember her on Mother's Day. My mother's eyes filled with angry tears. That's what this is about? One forgotten holiday? You're destroying this family over one day? It wasn't one day, I said quietly. It was decades of taking her for granted, of treating her like a bank, of only showing up when you needed something. She knew. She felt it. And she made a choice. A choice you influenced, my uncle accused. She was lonely, vulnerable. You took advantage. The lawyer cleared his throat. If I may, Mrs. Thompson left letters for each of you. Perhaps those will provide clarity. He handed out sealed envelopes. My mother ripped hers open immediately, scanning the handwritten pages. Her face crumpled. My uncle read his more slowly, his expression darkening with every line. Stephanie's hands shook as she read hers. I already knew what the letters said. My grandmother had shown them to me before she sealed them. They were kind but honest, loving but firm. She explained her decision not with anger, but with sadness. Told them she hoped they'd learn from this, that they'd treat the people they loved with more care, that they'd realize love isn't something you can take for granted. She ended each letter the same way. I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. I hope someday you understand. My mother finished reading and looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and rage. I'll contest this, she said. You won't win. Maybe not, my mother said, but I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. Go ahead, I said tiredly. Tell them. Tell them I spent time with her when you didn't. That I called when you forgot. That I loved her without expecting anything in return. See how that plays out. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because she knew. They all knew. The lawyer gathered his papers. If anyone wishes to contest the will, you have the right to do so. But I should warn you, it's expensive and unlikely to succeed. Mrs. Thompson took great care to ensure this would stand. No one said anything. They just sat there, drowning in the weight of their own choices. I stood up. I'm going to go now. The house is mine, so I'd appreciate it if you'd leave when you're ready. And I walked out. The weeks that followed were brutal. My mother hired a lawyer and filed a contest. It went nowhere. The medical evaluations were ironclad. My grandmother had been sharp until the very end. The will stood. Stephanie tried a different approach, reaching out to extended family members, spinning a story about how I'd manipulated a lonely old woman. Some people believed her. Most didn't. The ones who'd actually known my grandmother understood. My uncle went silent, stopped returning calls. I heard through the grapevine that he was struggling financially, drowning in the debt my grandmother had always bailed him out of. Part of me felt bad for him, but a bigger part of me remembered all the times he'd promised to do better and never did. This was his consequence. Not my responsibility. As for me? I moved into my grandmother's house. It felt strange at first, living in her space without her. But slowly, it started to feel like home. I kept her garden going, joined her book club, even took up watercolor painting like she had. I didn't sell the house or blow through the money. I invested most of it, set up a scholarship fund in her name for students from low-income families. She would have liked that. Using her money to help people who actually needed it, not people who just wanted it. I still think about her every day. Wonder if I did the right thing. If I should have fought harder to bring the family together. But then I remember her words. Don't let them make you feel guilty. You loved me when it wasn't convenient. That matters. And I realized she's right. I don't owe them my inheritance. I don't owe them an explanation. I don't owe them anything. What my grandmother left me wasn't just money or a house. It was validation. Proof that the love I gave mattered. That showing up counts. That being there, really being there, is worth more than any amount of money could ever buy. So no, I don't feel guilty. I feel grateful. Grateful that I had her in my life. Grateful that she knew she was loved. Grateful that in the end, she chose herself. And in doing so, she taught me the most important lesson of all. You can't pour from an empty cup. And you shouldn't have to. So here's my final question for you. If you were in my shoes, would you have done anything differently? Would you have split the inheritance evenly to keep the peace? Or would you have honored your grandmother's wishes, even knowing it would tear the family apart? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments below. Be honest. This is a judgment-free zone, and if this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your own life who deserve more recognition, more appreciation, more love, then please subscribe. Hit that notification bell, because I've got more stories to share. Stories about family, about boundaries, about standing up for the people who can't stand up for themselves. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, love the people who show up for you. The rest is just noise.